Stay a While by Anthony Vecchiarello. Transcript from his novel. Chapter 6. In a swift motion, Troy opened the supply closet and was immediately tackled by an unknown person. The weight of the body knocked Troy to the ground. "Ah!" they both screamed. He pushed it off him, jumped back, and aimed the shotgun at the figure's body. Troy could see it was a man who was getting up. "Freeze! Don't move, or I'll blow your head off to Kingdom Come," Troy said threateningly. It turned its head. The man's eyelids were sewed shut, but its physical, stocky stature and clothing resembled a familiar person. It had short brown hair. "Damien!" Troy cried. "Troy, is that you?" Damien replied. "Yes, it is, Bud. But what did they do to you?" Troy said shockingly. "I don't know, but I can't see. I don't even know how long I've been inside that closet," Damien explained. "Look, it's not safe here. We need to escape. But before we do, we need to get you to an infirmary. There's got to be some kind of a nurse's station in this facility," Troy explained with confidence as he lowered his weapon. "I thought you were a dead man. I tried to distract them back at the house. I shut off the power from the electrical breaker inside the garage. I then ran back to the van to grab the gun. Right when I got there, these people in robes came out of nowhere and put a bag over my head. They even took my phone and placed it in a backpack inside the van. They then knocked me unconscious with a sedative needle. The next thing, I wake up in total darkness. It took a while for me to figure out that I was inside something. I called for help and got no response. I fell into a deep sleep. The sound of something falling woke me up out of a terrible nightmare," Damien explained, adding, "I figured it was someone, so I knocked as loud as I could to get your attention." "You're lucky it was me and not some psychotic, ghoulish freak," Troy replied. "That's why I did not call for help. What happened to my van?" "What are you talking about?" Damien asked. "I've seen some horrible things, Damien. We are living a nightmare right now. Well, your van blew up. They want to kill us, but I won't let that happen," Troy stated as he lifted up his shotgun. "How did my van explode?" Damien asked as the tone in his voice got angry. "Long story short, I went to get some gas, but a mob of geeks were after me and they drove a pickup truck right into the van. It blew up since the oil and the gas station fused together to form a massive combustion. Nothing I could have done. I'm sorry," Troy explained. "I love that van, dude. Fuck," Damien replied annoyingly. "How did you even get it started?" "I had the keys with me until they stole it," Damien asked. "I used the screwdriver," Troy replied. "Classic," Damien responded as he shrugged his shoulders. "The van is the least of our problems. Let me get back to the story," Troy explained. Troy continued to tell Damien what happened. "This town is not what it seems. Clean Village is run by this crazed demonic worshipping cult who call themselves the Craven. Based on documents and files I've read, it seems like they've performed some taboo shit linked to supernatural activity. I just came from a haunted morgue, filled with the skinless beings that were experimented upon or were just visiting bystanders that suffered the hands of Alcazar. Doctors combined animal parts and morphed people into monsters. Troy started searching for some supplies in the other closets. All Troy discovered was a small box of matches that he stuffed in his back pants pocket. The closet Damien was trapped inside was completely empty and hollow. The overhanging lamp shined over a solid wooden structure. Damien lowered his head and sighed in frustration. His eyebrows then raised in shock whilst black stitches remained clamped to his eyelids. "Who is Alcazar?" Damien asked. When Damien took a step forward, he fell on his knees. Troy immediately blocked the impact of his fall as he lunged at his legs. Troy held up the weight of Damien's legs. "These drugs still haven't worn off," Damien said calmly. "Don't worry. Just put your right arm around my right shoulder," Troy ordered Damien. Damien nodded and did exactly what he was instructed to do. The flashlight remained fastened on Troy's left shoulder as his shotgun was held in the grasp of his left hand. Troy started to help carry his friends back in the direction of the cafeteria. When they turned the corner, the dead chef was still dead and rested flat on the ground lifelessly. They slowly walked closer to the body. Tension was building in Troy's mind. They got closer and closer to the corpse. Troy told Damien to walk around the corpse. Damien felt around his legs. Damien bumped into the chef's arm. "Take the chef's butcher knife and do it quick," Troy told his friend. "Why is there a corpse on the floor?" Damien asked as his nerves shivered. "Don't think about it. Just walk and stay with me," Troy instructed his friend to remain brave. Damien felt around for a fist and tried prying the knife out. Damien pulled and pulled. Troy helped by opening up the clenched fingers. Damien grabbed and pulled out the knife with his right hand. They continued pressing forward. They were at the end of the hallway when they turned to the right. The smell of rotting food came back to them. "What is that awful smell?" Damien said as he buried his nose in his shirt. "We're inside a kitchen. Food is rotten," Troy replied. They eventually made it back inside the cafeteria by walking through the open door on the left. Troy was happy to leave that kitchen. Troy led them to the vending machine on the ground. "Are you able to help me lift this vending machine?" Troy asked. "I can try," Damien replied. The two grabbed the bottom ends of the machine and lifted it up enough to get it on its side. They struggled with each angle of gravity, but managed to lift it up. They both let out a long groan and followed up with a big sigh. They simultaneously panted in exhaustion until turning their heads toward the machine, which was now leaned at a 90-degree angle. An array of snacks and candy bars were exposed. Troy started looting all of the snacks and gave them to Damien. They walked over to the nearest table with benches. They both scattered them on the table across from each other and picked out the ones they wanted to eat right away. They started ripping open the plastic wrapping. Troy and Damien then sat down across from each other on the benches. They both started munching on delicious crackers and chips while also delving into some sweet chocolate. All Troy and Damien heard now were the crunching of breaking chips between their teeth and the chewing of dessert in their gums. They simultaneously moaned at the pleasure they were receiving from eating the snacks. After a minute of paradise, Damien stopped chewing and said, "Did you hear that?" "What?" Troy asked with a muffled mouth full of chocolate. "Listen, I hear someone talking," Damien replied as he broke more chips with his teeth. They listened intently and could faintly hear someone saying, "Where is my knife?" "Oh fuck, come on, let's move that table over there by the double doors." Troy pointed, even though it was no use since Damien was blind at the moment. They gathered up whatever snacks they still had and stuffed them into their pockets. Troy added a few to his jacket. Troy got up off the bench, walked over, and stood at a stance. He readied his shotgun and aimed it at the doorway to the kitchen, about 25 feet away. "You okay to walk now?" Troy asked. "I should be," Damien replied. "Damien, can you pull that table back by the double doors?" "I will wait close to the kitchen door with my gun," Troy whispered. Without hesitation, Damien walked towards the double doors and accidentally bumped into the table. This made him jump, but he shimmied to the left and grabbed the handles. Damien tightened his muscular biceps and pulled the table back enough so they could open one of the doors. Meanwhile, Troy heard footsteps coming closer to the cafeteria. When he noticed it was the chef walking into his view, he immediately fired his shotgun upon it. It did not move, except stared at him as its blackened eyelids and mouth opened wide like a gashing wound. Troy opened fire again as the force from the gun lunged him a few inches backwards. Blood spattered, but the chef was still unharmed. Troy walked backwards and reloaded his gun. The chef, who was female, was extremely fat and tall, about 6'2". She walked closer to Troy. Troy turned to Damien and shouted, "Run!" Damien opened the door and Troy followed. They were back in the hallway. The two friends jogged down the unexplored corridor to the right of the cafeteria doors. Damien walked up ahead quickly as the butcher knife remained clenched in his right hand. Troy caught up to Damien and looked behind when he saw the same woman chef busting the door open. "I want my knife back," the chef called out robotically. Her steps were wide enough to match Troy and Damien's jogging. Troy emptied 2 more shells into the indestructible force, one in the chest and one in the head. The chef continued to mutter, Give me my knife. I don't know where I'm going, Damien said frightfully. Just keep jogging straight. Bullets aren't putting her down, Troy shouted. Damien stopped jogging, turned 180 degrees behind him, and tossed the butcher knife underhand across the hallway. What are you doing? Troy asked. Before he could get an answer, the butcher knife wound up on the floor in front of the chef. She looked at it, picked it up, and fell face flat on the floor like a rag doll. The floor created an echoing thump. The chef was now resting on the concrete floor in the same exact position she was earlier in the kitchen, where the butcher knife remained clenched in her right hand. Troy observed the entire sequence while Damien was listening in the same direction. Troy had a confused expression on his face. What happened? She's still after us? Damien asked. No, she only wanted her knife back. She passed out once she had her knife in her possession again. Good thinking. Let's get out of here. Come on, Troy explained. Troy reloaded his gun, leaving only an extra 5 shells in his pocket. The two left the body of the chef in the hall and continued walking down the dreary corridor. The corridor got darker again as Troy clicked his flashlight back on top of his shoulder. Damien followed a foot behind him. The ceilings and walls were tainted red and rusting. There were several blackened cracks skewed across the walls. They unnaturally formed a picture of tree roots. As they walked, Troy and Damien had an uncomfortable tingling in their crotch. They realized their bladders were full. Damien tapped on Troy's shoulder and said, I gotta pee, dude. Yeah, me too. There's gotta be a bathroom around here, Troy answered. The two made it to the end of the corridor. It split into 2 hallways, one going right while the other going left. In the center was a heavy red metal door with a square window to look through. This window, however, was fogged up. Troy crept up to the door and then smudged the condensation off with a jacket sleeve from his left hand. He looked through and saw a factory. The moonlight and lightning from outside illuminated the massive room. There were numerous stations, several assembly lines, and tall warehouse storage shelves. The machines were turned off, intricate, complex. As he was about to turn the dull beige handle, he stopped himself when he saw a skinless cannibal walking across the factory, then 2 more, then 5 more. Troy turned his head to his friend with his eyelids horribly sewed shut and said, Not through here. Let's take the right hallway. Damien nodded. Damien followed Troy to the hallway on the right. They continued walking down another dark and rusted corridor for about a minute. The paint was chipping away and cracking. Troy kept turning his waist to see if there were any doors that could be opened for searching. After another 10 steps, Troy stopped, raised his shoulders to shine his light on an overhanging sign that showed the male and female symbol for restroom. Troy was smiling. We find a bathroom? Damien asked. Oh, yes we did, Troy replied. There were 2 doors, one for male and the other for female. Troy aimed his gun and kicked open the male bathroom door. When they got inside, they had to turn the corner. It was a normally shaped public bathroom, but extremely dirty. There was only one light bulb hovering the middle section of the room. There were 4 stalls to the left, urinals further down, and 4 sinks to their right. The white tile floor was far from polished and shiny. Troy led them down the room to the urinals, which were on the far left side. There were 4 adult-sized urinals. Troy placed his shotgun with the butt end of his gun hitting the floor. He stopped close enough to one of the urinals to unzip his pants. Whatever you do, don't touch anything, Troy commanded Damien. Troy could see with his peripheral vision that Damien was having a hard time finding exactly where the urinal gap was. Move to your right a bit, Damien said. Damien moved a bit too much to the right. Damien started unzipping his pants when Troy corrected. You might now want to go a bit to your left. Just a tiny bit. Damien took an itsy-bitsy step. 1 extra half step to your left and you're golden, Troy added while shaking his head. Damien finally got it and started letting out his piss. Troy did the same. The feeling that overcame both of them was the same feeling they had when they each lost their virginity. The sound of their urine simultaneously hitting the bottom of the urinals was like a harmonic choir in which Simon and Garfunkel were singing. The release of the urine, coupled with the amount of stress and horror they were facing, was so relieving. I feel like I haven't pissed in 100 years, Damien moaned. Me too. This is amazing, Troy replied in nirvana. After what seemed like 5 minutes of pissing, the two friends burst out laughing. Their giggles were contagious of each other's. I could care less if one of those goons comes in here, Troy said, laughing. What are you talking about? All I see is darkness, Damien added. This set off Troy in more hysteria. Are you shitting me? God, you're lucky you can't see this right now, 'cause... How did you find me? Damien asked as he laughed like a hyena. It was a fucking trek, man. I thought you were dead. It was a lucky mistake, Troy replied drunkenly. They both cracked up together in unison as smiles spread across their mouths. The smiles turned to frowns as they both realized the seriousness of their situation. They were finally done peeing and zipped up their pants. Neither of them bothered to flush because it would attract too much noise and because bottoms of the toilets were disgusting. There was mold growing around the filter and yellowish stain marks around the walls. Damien suddenly clogged his nose with his fingers. You smell that? Damien asked. No. What does it smell like? Troy asked. Something decaying, Damien said as he pointed his finger in the vicinity of the stalls. Troy grabbed the shotgun against the wall and aimed the front of the double barrel straight ahead whilst both hands clenched the weapon. The left hand on the nose and the right just behind the trigger. Starting from the stall closest to the urinals from right to left, Troy began kicking each one open. He only saw dirty and unwashed toilets. However, as he got closer to the last stall, he could smell something putrid. When he kicked the last stall, he was horrified and squeamish at what he witnessed. Inside this stall, there was a decomposing corpse. It was a man sitting on the bowl with his head down and torso hunched forward, but his stomach was ripped open, revealing a tangled rope of intestines. A bit of the organs drooped against the floor. Blood was everywhere. But what was even worse was the maggots. There was a colony size of yellowy maggots eating out the remains of this man's guts. Troy turned away aggressively, closed the door, walked up to the restroom sink, and started vomiting. What's wrong, Troy? Damien asked out of concern. The sound of unbalanced fluid continued spewing out of Troy's mouth. His face turned red from the excessive inflammation in his esophagus. The veins in Troy's eyes looked as if they were about to pop. The sink was covered in black and brown, watery liquid. The sight of that made him gag even more. Damien was confused and terrified. Troy turned on the faucet and ran running water over his mouth and washed the rest of his face. His face needed a wash, regardless. Troy then looked at his reflection in the mirror. He had brown eyes, pale skin, brown hair, and a drawn, slender face with wrinkles under his eyelids. He then looked at the reflection of his friend in the mirror and said, You don't want to know what it was. Let's go. Okay, but now you have me curious, Damien said. The two walked out of the bathroom, with Troy leading the way with his Remington. They were back in the hallway. Troy led the way to their right and pressed onward. As they walked, Troy answered Damien's burning question. Maggots were eating the open guts of a corpse sitting on the toilet. Damien nodded and then replied, Yeah, I probably would have thrown up too. Their steps kept making a click-clack noise against the tough concrete floor. Troy's flashlight illuminated 20 feet in front of the darkened hallway. After a few minutes of walking and gradually discovering what appeared in front of them, Troy and Damien came to a set of double doors with the first aid Red Cross sign stuck above. These doors were white with fiberglass rectangular windows that were presented vertically. They had thin handles on either side. Troy pushed them forward. They were now inside a dimly lit infirmary. Everything from the tile flooring to the walls and ceiling were drenched in white. It was a massive room that had hospital beds on either side of each other. A reception desk rested in front, while medicine cabinets and surgical equipment lay next to each bed. Each bed was like a separate station. The beds were semi-closed off by blue, thin curtains. As they walked down the infirmary aisle, Troy noticed the bed's conditions. Most of the beds were exposed, but some were already covered by their curtains. When Troy walked, his light shined on one curtain with the shadow of a figure standing still. Troy pressed his finger closer to the shotgun trigger as he separated the seal of the curtains apart. Inside was only a coat hanger. The shadow from a lamppost made it look like it was a person. Troy gave a sigh of relief. "I hear something approaching," Damien said. Before Troy could mutter a question, they were both getting tackled by skinless cannibals. The shotgun fell out of Troy's hand as he attempted to push off the grotesque being. Damien was being overcome by another creature as well. The creature screamed in their ears and tried as hard as they could to bite at their flesh. Each of these creatures lacked a formal language and instead communicated through groans like animals. They bit at the air as their mandible collapsed together to tap their teeth. Troy then took out his revolver and was about to pull the trigger when the creature swapped it out of his hands. Damien punched one in the head and got a bit free until he was tackled to the ground again. This subsequently knocked over a tray full of surgical tools. One of them was a surgery knife that Troy saw only a few inches from Damien's hand. Troy, getting punched and strangled, called out to Damien, "Grab the knife, by your hand." Damien took the surgical knife and jabbed at the creature's head behind him. The knife missed its head, but penetrated through the left eyeball. Blood began dripping from the eye socket. "Ah!" The creature screamed in pain as it stood up and fell down, covering its hand over the damaged eye. Although Damien could not see him, the loud sound of the creature falling made it aware of its location. Damien grasped the knife in his fist and stabbed at the creature once again. This time the knife went through the top part of the cranium. It instantaneously fell lifeless to the floor. Troy, on the other hand, was still having trouble fending off the creature. "Throw me the knife, Damien," Troy shouted again. Damien instead ran to the noise and stabbed the knife right at the back of the cannibal's neck. Its eyes went dull as if the soul just left the body. It laid on Troy as dead weight. Troy pushed the corpse to the side of him on the floor. The body moved over like a heavy boxing bag. Damien took out his hand to reach Troy's. Troy grabbed it as Damien helped pull him up. "Thanks. You really pulled through," Troy said, adding, "Give me the knife, though." Damien handed Troy back the bloody knife. Troy then went to the creature he was fighting before and stabbed the knife through its temple. Troy picked out and handed the bloody blade back to Damien. Blood dripped out of the hole, formed in the creature's head, and flowed onto the white floor. "Needed to make sure he was dead," Troy explained. Troy picked up his revolver and shotgun off the floor. Troy glanced at the supplies in the room and at Damien's sewed-up eyelids. "Let's get ourselves fixed up," Troy stated. "Agreed," Damien said, with an uplifting grin.